Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
This episode is about everybody's favorite four-letter word, debt. And I'm being sarcastic if you didn't catch that. Some people are completely comfortable with debt, while for others, the very idea of even being a little bit in debt keeps them up at night. And as a business owner, there's, I'd say, a 99.9% chance that you're familiar with taking on debt for something, whether it's student debt, practice debt, new equipment, and so on. There's also this idea that there's such a thing as good or bad debt. Now, how that's defined really depends on what you're reading. Now, debt when applied to the right situation can be useful, but what's the right situation? In other words, in the business world and the dental world specifically, is there a simple test or tests that tell us whether taking on a new loan or some other kind of debt is a good or a bad idea? And further, is there some metric we can use to tell when taking on debt might be a danger sign? Well, yeah, to all of those questions above. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. I want to examine the concept of debt in detail and look at when, in my opinion, it's a good or a bad idea, or it can be a really severe danger sign. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And I think the best place to start is with a little bit of a disclaimer. First off, I am not an accountant. I'm not a tax attorney. I'm also not a financial planner. So what I'm telling you about this week, this is a podcast, right? I'm telling you, the things that we teach our clients, but I do advise that you have advisors like that on your team, maybe not that you're employing, but that you can refer to if you have questions about things like this. Otherwise, anything you're going to apply from this episode or really anything else, I'm a firm believer that people are responsible for their own condition. You have to do what is best in your judgment. So I'm going to keep this simple. How would I define good versus bad debt? Well, from a business perspective, you could apply this to other areas, I guess, but from a business perspective, good debt would be debt that created an adequate return. And by that, I actually mean two different types of return. One is necessity, and the other is money. It actually has a financial return. That would be good debt. Bad debt would be the exact opposite. Little or not enough or no return, or it just was not needed. So let's take a look at this in depth so I can kind of roll out for you how I apply this to the dental world. And I say this because I've seen plenty of cautionary tales with newer clients walking in to MGE, where they're under, a ton, loads of debt, and a lot of what they have debt for, really they didn't need in the first place. So let's look at the first aspect of good debt would be debt that had a monetary return, good versus bad rather. So you want to get a new piece of equipment, whether it's a cone beam or a CEREC, or you want to add a new operatory, or you feel like your office is too small and you need to move into a new practice. So let's pick a cone beam to start with. So you're placing implants and you would like to have a cone beam, right? Well, first question I would ask you is, how many cone beams would you do a month? Let's say you would do 2. Okay. And the revenue generated from that, if you're charging for it, some offices don't. They just treat it like a free x-ray or something like this. But the revenue generated from that isn't going to be enough to cover the lease payment or the loan payment that you're taking in order to purchase the cone beam. Well, in that case, that's probably not a good idea. I've also seen cases where somebody says, well, if I buy a cone beam, I know I'll use it more. Well, I would do a use case survey based on what I'm currently doing, not based on what I think is going to happen when I buy a cone beam. I've seen people even go so far that if they put the fact that they can do a cone beam on their promotion of some kind, it's going to all of a sudden just shake all of these patients who, out of the woodwork to come in. They're going to come out of the woodwork to come into their office. Like these people that they haven't been seeing, or, prospective new patients are going to rush in because they bought this new piece of equipment. That is usually never the case. So I would look at my use case based on, what am I doing now? How many cone beams could I be doing a month if I'm sending people out to get them? And let's say that's 2 or 3. Well, the revenue from that isn't going to be enough to cover the loan payment on the cone beam. So I'm probably not buying a cone beam. Same thing goes for any large purchase or piece of equipment. If I wanted to buy a Sirik, why would I buy a Sirik? Well, there's the advantage of a same day crown when I can use it. But then don't forget that's going to involve some of your time too, because that's a cost that you're not factoring in. But again, I've seen people buy Siriks and they buy it, and I'm not saying it's a bad machine. It's great. We have plenty of clients that use it, but they buy it and the crowns that they're doing on it, they would have been cheaper just paying a lab to do them. The lab fee is less than the lease payment on the Sirik. And that was a problem for Sirik years back. And again, this is all rumor. I don't want to get myself in trouble here with the folks at Sirik. But I remember years back, one of the issues that I was hearing from a couple people in the industry, it sounds very scuttlebutty, doesn't it? Was that Sirik was running into an issue because people were buying them and then realizing that they didn't really use them a lot or didn't know how or whatever. And there were more Sirik showing up on the secondary market. So it was actually kind of messing with the new sales a little bit. And that's not an indictment of the machine or the company. That's just an indictment of somebody buying something that they actually could not use, did not need. And by need, I mean, it didn't really have any type of a return associated with it. It was cheaper to not have one and just continue to use their lab. Now, if you find that you're doing 20, 30 crowns a month that you could be using a Sirik for, well, then that's a great investment. Same thing with a cone beam. If you find that, I could be, doing 20, 30 cone beam x-rays a month, 40 cone beam x-rays a month, well, then that's going to cover your loan or lease payment. You'd have to do the math on this. Well, then that's not a bad purchase. And if you have to take on debt to get it, well, in that case, I'm taking on some debt, whatever. And I know the range on these things vary depending on the machine that you're buying. I've seen stuff you can attach to your pan or you can get for another $40,000, or there's one that's $100,000. Let's say it's the $100,000 machine, but your revenue from cone beams is, $7,000, $8,000 a month, $6,000 a month. Well, that's probably a good deal. It's eventually going to continue. It's going to pay for itself, and the rest is going to be profit because that machine's going to last for a little while. Well, that's an example of good debt. The opposite would be you're not making enough and you're not going to be able to pay the payment. Like I said, there's two conditions I would have if I was taking on this debt. Number one, could I pay the payment now out of the current revenues that I have? In other words, if the lease payment for this thing is $2,100 a month, do I have that money right now? Am I making that excess every single month? I'm not talking even about projected income here yet. I'm talking about, do I have that money right now? Could I service this debt? The answer is yes, go for it. If I can't, and I'm hoping that by buying it, I'm going to make all this money, I would advise somebody not to buy it. I would continue referring my cone beams out, finding a place that's close by or a mobile unit that comes by once a week or something like that until I got up to the point where A, I needed it, like my volume justified it, or B, I had the excess funds without having made more money yet to cover the loan or lease payment. Okay. You could apply that to pretty much anything. If I'm going to take on debt with the idea that it's going to make me more money, I would have to take a look at the current level of money and profitability I have. Can I service that debt? If it's just a situation where it's a bit of a ticking time bomb in that, yeah, I could service it for a month or two with what I have in savings, but after that I can't, well, you're just setting yourself up for a problem 3 months down the road. You see? So then I would probably advise you don't do it. Get your revenues up, get your profitability up, and then take something on like that on. The decision to add a new operatory or heck, move your office. These are more complex decisions, but let's just take the new op concept for a second. So I need to add a new op. I need cabinetry. I need computers. I need a new chair. I possibly need a new x-ray head, unless I got one that bounces between two rooms and have an unequipped room. So that's going to cost a little bit of money. So, maybe I don't have the free cash right now. I'm going to take on some debt for it. Well, the first question would be, do I need this operatory? And need meaning, am I having problems delivering to my patient base? Is it lowering quality, speed, efficiency, or potentially income by not having that operatory? In a lot of cases, this may be a no-brainer. Let's say you have a 6-operatory office and you're working out of 2 as the owner doctor. Let's say I have an associate and they're working out of 2. So now 4 of the ops are gone, and then I have a hygienist in the other 2 operatories, and we're getting to where hygiene's really booked out and our marketing is starting to pick up and we run our new patients through hygiene. But let's say I'm plumbed for 8 operatories. and I want to add another hygienist, I have to add another operatory. It's sort of a no-brainer. If the volume is there, why would I not do it? So, I'm going to spend whatever I spend, anywhere from, depending on what I get, $10, $15, $20,000 to add that new chair and equipment, and I'm going to make that money back in no time. Plus, there's the financial reward aspect of it, but there's also the necessity aspect of it. I have to service my patient base. So in that case, that's a good purchase. But let's look at where it might be a bad purchase. Let's say I've got 4 chairs, I have 1.5 hygienists, and I'm working out of 2, and I really love to have a 3rd chair for overflow, just because it would be cool. Sometimes we have a lot of patients show up. In that case, I would probably examine my scheduling methodology before I start adding chairs. Am I running my schedule efficiently? Am I really working on a properly double booked schedule? Where I'm not just scheduling linearly. Can't say that word, sorry. Where I'm just doing one appointment after the other. Because I've seen people say they double book with one assistant, which is basically not possible. You can't double book with one dental assistant because your assistant is supposed to be with you the whole time. So if you properly double book, there's an assistant in each room. If I'm just going with one assistant to the next, it's sort of like having 2 chairs at your desk and just switching chairs while you clean the other one. That's not properly double booked. And if you think you need to add another one for overflow, you probably need to get a little bit more control on your schedule first before you go adding that up. So you're not going to see that return that you want. So sort of, number 1, I'm looking at, can I make the payment? Number 2, I'm looking at, is it going to have return? Number 3, I'm looking at, is this thing really needed? And part of the way I can determine whether something's really needed is, am I getting the most from what I already have? And that word need and want sometimes get confused, especially when it comes to financial submissions and things like this. If you have somebody who wants to buy something new for the practice, we really need branded toothbrushes, because it's going to do this for us or that for us. Well, you need air, you need food, you need water, or you're going to die, okay? But you don't necessarily need a new television. You'd want a new television, but, or a new computer, but you don't need it. So you have to take a look at need versus want. And then if someone wants something, I would have to look at it and go, okay, is this going to have any type of an effective return? But if I have to take any debt out for it, or really honestly, I would look at that with just spending money in general. If I'm going to spend money on something, what am I getting for my money? If I'm getting nothing, then kind of what was the point? Unless it's a personal expense where I just want something that I think is cool and I have the money to spend it. So that's where, where I've seen a lot of people get into trouble, especially like I said with newer clients. They come in and they have stuff that they didn't really need and they bought because they got caught up in the, we've all heard this term FOMO, fear of missing out. It's an acronym. They get caught up in the FOMO of, oh, I need this piece of equipment. It would just be awesome. Oh, I need this. I need that. Because look, I know new equipment is cool. You want to be cutting edge. You want your office to be cool and things like this, but you really have to boil it down to how is this going to impact my practice financially if it has a financial outlay associated with it. Now, there are certain expenses where, if your autoclave stops working, you have to have an autoclave. That's a need. So in which case, let's say you should have the cash for an autoclave, truthfully, but let's say you didn't. Okay, you need to take out a little bit of debt to get the autoclave, fine. You take out some debt to get the autoclave because you can't be open without an autoclave, okay? Or there's something that you need to really, really ensure you maintain standard of care with your patients, which I guess an autoclave would fall under that, but you get what I'm saying, certain instruments or certain kits of instruments or something along those lines. Well, then fine, if you have to take a little bit of debt out for those, otherwise you feel like you're not meeting the standard of care that you set for yourself, well, then I understand, okay? So it's just like your patients. When we're talking about the reason for taking out debt, there's a degree of necessity. If I come to you and I have all kinds of dental problems and I have trouble chewing and I've got perio, well, let's be real. That's going to affect the quality of my life. It possibly will shorten my life if I have untreated disease, and you present a treatment plan to me and I need to take on some debt in order to have this treatment. Well, yeah, okay, there's not a financial return. You could say I'm going to live longer, so that's, I guess, good. But how can you put a price tag on quality of life and life extension, right? Or potential life extension, I should say. Well, in that case, fine. You take on some debt. How important is your life? I'm not going to be able to take all the money with me anyway, so what's the point? I may as well take care of myself, right? I can't take it with me. But that's where, you might have something where adding somebody else will reduce stress. You're at a point where, let's say you have an employee up at the front and they're just frazzled and they're working 65 hours a week and they really need some help up there, which truthfully, that will have a financial return. If I'm going to add an employee and put that person on the job and, reduce the stress and the workload of the more menial tasks from that long, that 65 hour in a week employee and get their hours down, I'm going to extend the employment lifespan of that employee. I should also see a return in additional production or productivity, something you should always look at. If I add a staff member to an area, I would expect for that area to start making money within, at least 30 days or more money rather. Because if I add a staff member and there's zero return on income, then it's sort of like, how is their salary getting paid for? They're just more of a convenience at that point, as opposed to somebody who's really got their shoulder to the wheel and is really pushing things forward. So if I'm making a financial decision and I normally people apply this to larger purchases because that's usually when you're going to take on debt for something, right? Is for a larger purchase. Really examine it and really take a look at what return is this going to have? What effect is this going to have on my practice? Is there going to be an adequate financial return in order to justify having bought this? And also look at, can I pay that payment now? Because if I can't, that's a bit of a problem. I need to get my profitability up before I go ahead and do that. The last example I'd give you would be if I was looking at moving offices, in which case it would sort of be an expanded version of what I just described with adding an operatory. I'd have to take a look. Have I really maxed out my current physical plant? Is there just nothing? I've got a 3-op office. I'm in a condo unit. I can't expand. There's nowhere else to go. And I'm working 35 hours a week. And I really want to buy a new office or move to a new office. And, there's one thing where you're hunting for the opportunity. Fine. But let's say some great opportunity pops up out of the blue, a building to buy and it's at a good price. Well, then, yeah, maybe that's not a bad idea. It could be a decent investment, right? But something to keep in mind too, this is where a lot of people messed up in 2005, 6 and the real estate crisis back then. For those of you who were, weren't in the workforce during the great financial crisis or the great financial crisis, the real estate meltdown in 2008. Basically, real estate prices went nuts. It was not the Great Depression. That was in 1929, and I was not alive for that. But it was pretty severe hit to the economy, and people had overpaid for real estate, and then the real estate was then valued a lot less, and they ended up underwater, meaning they owed more than the real estate was worth. But in a lot of cases, people could have kept themselves from getting into a mess because you're going to have to take out debt. Let's say you're buying a condo. And you go, okay, this condo is great. I really like this condo. It'd be great to have a condo. So that condo is going to cost you $300,000. And then you look at your mortgage payment because I think interest rates, funnily enough, people freak out about interest rates now. They were just as high back then or just about as high. Not quite as high, but they were decent. They weren't like they were 3-4 years ago where they were next to nothing. But you're going to buy this condo and you're going to be at, 5% interest because it's an investment condo and it's $300,000 and your monthly payment is going to be about $2,800 a month if you include the condo HOA fees. So if you took a step back and you went, okay, so I'm buying this condo and it's cool and I want to use it personally. The first question you would have to ask yourself to see, is this a good or a bad investment? Am I paying too much for this? Would be, could I rent this condo for probably more than $2,800 because there's going to be repairs, right? Can I rent this condo for $3,000 or $3,200 a month? You look at it and you go, there's no way I could rent this place for $3,200 a month. The most I would get is $1,800. Well, your mortgage payment is going to be $2,900. Don't buy the condo. That's just a terrible investment. It's overpriced, right? So it's something to look at. Like if you're taking on, again, that would have no financial return. It's stuff you want to look at it. So if I'm moving to a new office, do I really need to? Because I've seen lots of moves where they happen and people regret that they moved. B, have I maxed out my physical plant? I gave you that example of the person in the business condo or, in a business park and they're in 3 chairs and they can't expand. Well, and they're working 35 hours a week and they really don't have any great opportunities in their area. They would, having to create one essentially and renting somewhere else. What I would probably do before I did that, I opened a new office and spent $500,000 on build out. I would probably expand the hours because the truth is you're paying for your condo 24 hours. And then by condo, I mean for the practice, right? Not a personal condo in the example I was getting a minute ago. But you're paying for that condo 24 hours a day. Now, you might not be able to use it according to the bylaws in your office park for 24 hours a day, but I could probably use it more than 35 hours a week. Well, then I'd expand my hours. You do what we call a split shift where, not that you're going to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week now, but it's almost like you have 2 practices in one place. So you expand the hours, you get a second junior manager, you get an associate doctor, and, you come in from 7 to 2 and they come in from 2 to 7. and you're open 5 days a week, maybe a Saturday morning, and you split the shifts and you're working 35 hours and your other team is working 35 hours and you're getting the most out of those 3 operatories at that point. Assuming there was no amazing opportunity in my area. Now, let's say I've done that, I've split my shifts. I'm working 35 hours a week. My office my schedule's packed. My associate's schedule is packed. We're scheduled as efficiently as we possibly can. What might I do then? I know I'm kind of going off here a little bit. It was mainly about debt, but I'm just trying to give you an idea. I'd probably look and see if there's any plans that I need to drop. Because if I drop some plans, I'm going to lose some patients, potentially up to 30% of the patients out of these plans. So I'm going to phase out of plans. So let's say I've phased out of plans. I'm charging full fee. I made sure my fees are actually up to date and I'm charging the right amount. And my split shifts are completely full. Right? I'm working from 7 to 2, 5 days a week. My associate's working from 2 to 7, 5 days a week and a little bit on Saturday mornings. And, we're just packed. There's nowhere else to put patients. We're pushing people off weeks in advance. We have zero managed care in the practice. So this is a super profitable situation. Well, in that case, I might have to find another location at that point. I might have to find another place that I can expand into because now my physical plant just cannot support the amount of volume I have in my business. Do you see? But those are the things I would look at before I moved, because when you move, especially with the dental practice, it's not like moving, I don't know, some healthcare professionals, if they're a chiropractor, they're moving an x-ray machine and some tables, right? You're having to plumb, you're having to buy equipment. You can't take all your cabinets with you. It's expensive. So before I would commit to something like that, regardless of how this is my dream office or whatever, I would make sure that I've maxed out my current plant fully. Or if an incredible opportunity popped up, then maybe I'm going to jump at that because, that's going to have a potential return too from a real estate perspective. So that's the good versus the bad debt. There's return, there's necessity, and, there's those basic rules. Can I service it at my current level of volume? Is what I'm going to make off this thing based on my current use of those, or potential use case scenarios, how many crowns I'm doing for, a CEREC, for example, or how many cone beams, et cetera. Is it going to pay the lease payment, right? Those are the things I'm going to look at before I make a major investment like that. And if it's an operatory or a new office, I'm trying to get as efficient as possible before I do it. Now, the last scenario, I mentioned that potentially where debt could be a red flag is when some people, there's this idea in business that, businesses should have lines of credit and debt because that's just something you do in business. I've got this line of credit. I've got loans. It's just what businesses have. And so let's say I'm taking loans out or I'm using credit cards or I'm using a credit line to pay my bills. Now that might have happened to you during the COVID shutdowns. Understood. That was a unique set of circumstances that you couldn't have predicted. But let's say, it's just you had a bad month or you had 2 bad months and now you're burning through your savings and now you're going to have to tap your credit line in order to pay your bills. Well, some people look at that and they go, well, businesses carry lines of credit and debt and sometimes there's slow and, busy periods. That's the wrong viewpoint. If I'm having to take on debt to pay my bills, and there's no real extenuating circumstance. It's not like we had an ice storm and no power for 2 weeks or something like this. It's just business as usual, and we've gone through 2 months where we haven't made enough to pay our bills, so I'm using debt to fund my bills. That is a 5-alarm fire. And I bring that up because I've seen some people who have this sort of shruggy nonchalance about it, like, well, yeah, it's what businesses do. They have lines of credit. Well, you're running a dental practice. You're not running a ball bearing factory that uses a line of credit to fund itself while they're waiting for the car manufacturer they ship the ball bearings to pay the bill, in 45 days. That isn't your business model. You're a small business, okay? So you should be able to pay your bills every single month. So for me, if I have to take on debt to pay bills and there isn't some weird circumstance, which even then, regardless of the weird circumstance, that's still not a sustainable situation long term. I'm going to have to figure something out, okay? But if that's just something that's happening, you need to look at that more like a 5-alarm fire. That is urgent. That is a problem. That is a severe, acute situation. You need to jump all over that with both feet and dig into, what is going on. For me, it would be the first week or month that happened. I would handle it with the utmost of urgency. I have a problem because if I continue this, where I'm not making enough in order to pay my bills, I'm eventually going to be bankrupt. I don't have the ability to manufacture money. So I'm not a government. So I'm going to have to pay my bills. So I'm going to jump in and figure out why all of a sudden we're having to take on debt to pay the bills. Now, hopefully that isn't a longer term situation. Maybe it was a 1 month thing. I correct whatever it was at a non-productive staff member. My marketing company wasn't doing what they were supposed to do, whatever it might be. Someone was out of the office for a few weeks and we didn't have a function covered. There could be any number of reasons for this, but I'm going to want to correct that with the utmost of urgency, because that's not a sustainable situation. Now, if it's a longer term situation where you're just not paying your bills, again, that's something you're going to have to correct, because there's the iceberg. It's coming. There's the light on the train and you're standing on the tracks. You need to jump into that and figure out why all of a sudden you're not paying your bills and you're having to take on debt. We're more than willing to help with that. It's actually very easy to sort out. I know people say that, but really it is. It's easy to figure out why that might be happening to you. If you want help with something like that, we offer a free practice consultation. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage, where maybe you're not profitable enough, or you're having to, go into debt to pay your bills and you're in practice for more than 3 months. But that's something that's not sustainable. And, I've seen extreme situations like that where people take on debt and it works out, where, I remember we had a client that was doing $3,000 a month, and we sat down with them and we looked. They had about $20,000-$30,000 in working capital left, and they basically realized they had 5 or 6 months till they were out of working capital. So they signed up for the MGE communication and sales seminars. These are the seminars where we teach doctors how to sell and, get patients to want what they need. And they did great. I mean, they ended up doing $100 and something thousand a month afterwards. They did that in our power program as well, but they saw an immediate 10, 20, 30,000 a month increase. And the average increase on those seminars is close to $300,000 a year. Well, you're spending, whatever they are, $11,000 to make an extra $300 a year. That's a pretty good return. If you had taken a little bit of debt for that, fine. But they could service their debt at least for the next few months, in order to buy them some time to do that. The other aspect of that is where they were very, very quickly spinning their wheels and going nowhere. So it wasn't a difficult decision to make. Anyway, debt, like anything else, is a tool. It's like if you're, using saws and hammers and table saws and circular saws and things like this. When the tool is used properly, the outcome is positive. You have a nicely cut 2x4, or the thing came out, whatever you're working on came out well. You built what you wanted to build. If you use the tool improperly, you end up, with smashed thumbs and missing fingers. So if it's used in its correct application, the correct way, very useful, very helpful. When it's not, it can become bad. But in any event, I hope this helps. If you want to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com. Folks, that's all I got for you this week. Have a great week, and I'll see you at the next episode.